So what we found is that there's no statistical evidence of a deterrent effect. We found that it appears that the actual decreases are the result of long-term trends that would be expected given the nature of the series. We found a number of sectors where the actual decreases in apprehensions began much earlier, as early as 2000. We found a number of other sectors where the levels that you see after Operation Streamline are very consistent with levels that you see earlier. And in one sector, we particularly note that after Operation Streamline, apprehensions actually go up. After establishing that Operation Streamline did not deter unauthorized entry, it becomes a question of saying, what are the impacts of Operation Streamline itself? What are the costs associated with this particular policy? One of the things that I looked at was the actual impact on the federal court system. And so when we look at the federal courts that make up the courts within the Southwest border region, what we see is a huge increase in the number of individuals who are being prosecuted for petty reentry or petty entry charges, right? Or petty immigration charges. So these would include the basic charges of unauthorized entry, as well as unauthorized reentry. So these are crimes for which, under this type of prosecution, the actual criminal act is simply being within the United States without authorization. You look at the actual amount of growth, and it varies across jurisdiction, with some of them growing as much as 450% over the time period from, say, 1997 to 2014. So you see this huge amount of growth. The other thing that we looked at that was important was the idea that were these prosecutions related to other charges, right? Were they related to things like immigration being involved as a lesser included, related to, say, a drug charge or a firearms charge? And what we found predominantly is that in the 90% range, right, varying from about 93 to about 98% of all of these charges are charges where the highest offense, the most serious offense, was immigration. And ranging from about 90 to 95% of the cases were cases where it was the only offense. So a court can only process so many cases, right? And so when you look kind of earlier in the series, when you look further back in time, maybe in the range of, say, 1997, what you see in a number of the districts is that there's actually a very small percentage of cases. Some of them are 7%, 10%, 15%. And that's the percent of cases that court's dealing with that are actually immigration cases. The trends on those skyrocket, and you end up with courts where by, say, 2010, 2014, where you have 50 to 70% of cases actually being immigration cases. Now, keeping in mind the other cases are other federal cases of import, right? So there has been research that's shown that these things might be replacing drug charges, firearms charges, or charges that we might refer to as more serious immigration charges like human trafficking. We see this substantial growth in the number of prosecutions, and yet looking back at the apprehension data, it's important to recognize that that's happening in an environment where the number of apprehensions is going down, right? That clearly demonstrates that we're prosecuting more and more individuals based upon fewer and fewer apprehensions. So across this time period, particularly after Operation Streamline, but it extends further back, the number of actual individuals working for Customs and Border Patrol in the region actually grows precipitously. So there's increased enforcement effort in the area, and that increased enforcement is happening at a time when apprehensions are going down. Now, this is the process where the claim that deterrence is happening. It's one of the arguments for that. It turns out that when you look at when the actual criminalization occurs, starting in 2005 in Del Rio, it doesn't bear out statistically that that's what's going on. The evidence that we have shows that Operation Streamline did not effectively deter. Yet we know that the rhetoric that it did has been used to justify its existence. And so this is an example where poor analysis is used to support programs that aren't effective. Right? So we might think about this analysis as being anecdotal. Right? We might think about it as an example where we recognize that you can justify a program by saying it works. Right? But outside of a rigorous evaluation, you're really justifying that based upon very limited evidence.